Good evening, everyone. Thank you to our live audience members for joining us tonight. And thank you to our Facebook Live members for tuning in as well. I'm Joe Wirtz. I serve as the Dean of Students here and the Executive Director for our Gregorian Fellows Leadership Program, one of the co-sponsors tonight. But I'd like to introduce to you first Jordan Malcolm, President of the BSU, who will introduce our speaker. Thank you. Jordan.
First, I just want to thank everyone for coming out regarding all the social injustice issues going on in our world today. As Dean Wirtz said, I'm the president of the Black Student Union on campus. Unfortunately, because of COVID and everything, we haven't been able to have any set meetings or anything. But if you're interested in the BSU or you have any questions that you would like to ask me, and regarding change or anything that we want to have on campus or in the world today, feel free to come by and ask me any questions after the talk. And regarding change, our speaker tonight is known as one of the most sought-after speakers in the church today. He travels across the world speaking at conferences, workshops, retreats, parish missions, high schools, and young adult events. Basically, in short, everyone who desires to know Jesus intimately. He holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree in Economics and Business Administration from the University of Notre Dame and a Master's of Theological Studies from the University of Dallas. He is the author of the best-selling book, Behold the Man, A Catholic Vision of Male Spirituality, a co-author of Ignite, Read the Bible Like Never Before, and has written the acclaimed new book, Father Augustus Tolton, the slave who became the first African-American priest. He is known around the world as a dynamic deacon. Everyone please welcome Deacon Harold Burke-Sivers.
Whew. In the book of Numbers, chapter 12, right at the beginning of the book of Numbers, the story is told of Miriam and Aaron speaking out against Moses. It says Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses because of the Cushite woman whom he had married. So the Cushite, this Ethiopian, so she was an Ethiopian woman. In other words, she was a black African woman that Moses married. And Miriam and Aaron were upset because Moses married a black woman. And the anger of, verse 9, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against them, and he departed. And when the cloud removed from over the tent, so remember when Moses was in the presence of the Lord in the tent of meeting, the Shekinah, glory of God, the glory cloud came over the tent, and when Moses came out, the cloud went away. So he's coming out of the tent, the cloud goes away, and behold, Miriam was leprous, as white as snow. And Aaron turned toward Miriam, and behold, she was leprous. And Aaron said to Moses, O my Lord, do not punish us, because we have done foolishly and have sinned. So we see this idea of racism, that my race is superior to your race, is a sin in the Bible. And God says, okay, you want to be white? I'll show you white. Bam, and he made her leprous as a punishment. Now, Martin Luther King, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, said this: sooner or later, all the people of the world will have to discover a way to live together in peace, and thereby transform this pending cosmic elegy into a creative psalm of brotherhood. He went on to say that if peace and racial equality is to be achieved, man must evolve for all human conflict a method that rejects revenge, aggression, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Dr. King is speaking of a love rooted in faith, a faith that acknowledges what John says in his first letter: God is love. And he who lives in love lives in God, and God lives in him. So racial injustice and prejudice are antithetical to love, to truth, to freedom, and to peace. Now, in order to adequately address the issue of race, we have to define our terms. So we have to differentiate prejudice from racism, two different things. So prejudice with regard to race is a preconceived notion about someone that is not based on facts or even objective experience and often leads to stereotyping. Racism is prejudice with the added dimension that my race is superior to your race. So you're basing your belief system that your prejudices and your biases on the fact specifically that your race is superior to another person's race. So let me give you an example. Now, as you heard, I went to Notre Dame. I'm the first person in my family ever to go to college. I had an academic scholarship to Notre Dame. But because of my size, like what happened back in January before COVID, I was speaking at a parish, and a guy came up to me, "Oh, you went to Notre Dame. What position did you play?" Now, that wasn't a racist statement, but it was sure prejudice, because that was an observation not based on any facts or objective experience. He just saw a big black guy, Notre Dame equals football. What he should have asked me was, what did I study? That's what he should have asked me. So that statement wasn't necessarily a racist statement, but it was definitely prejudiced. Now, a racist would be like, Ku Klux Klan and, groups like that, that my race is superior to your race, and we're basing our ideology and the way we deal with you based on that fact. Now, all of us, to some extent, harbor some level of prejudice, even if it's not racial prejudice. So, for example, I traveled to the South, before COVID, I used to travel to the South quite often. And the first time I started going to the South, I'm like, oh, gosh, you guys must like shrimp and grits. Because, of course, everybody from the South likes shrimp and grits. That's a prejudice statement. It's not a racist statement, but that's just an assumption I made because they live in the South. The problem is when it comes to race, we consume images and sound bites from television, movies, social media that inundate us with caricatures of various races that are often derisive and belittling, and even if only subliminally, plant seeds of half-truths in the minds and the hearts of viewers and listeners. Now, why do I say that? Because racism is learned. When you have little kids, like when my kids were little, and they're playing with other kids, it doesn't matter the kid's black, white, Native American, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. They're all playing because they're just kids. They don't care. It's later when they start learning this way, they start seeing what their parents are doing, jokes that are made. They start seeing these images over and over and over on television. Let me be clear. For example, when you look at a movie like Glory, or when I was a kid, Roots, or movies that depict slavery, what they're depicting is an actual historical period of time where this thing happened. But when you see images over and over again of black people as slaves, or black people as thieves, or black people as drug dealers, or black people without any other images to reinforce that, even subliminally in your mind, that starts to work into your psyche. For example, when I was a kid, they had Western movies, right? So the hero, the hero cowboy wore the white hat, the bad guy wore the black hat. If you're on a safe list like internet, if you're whitelisted, that means it's safe. If you're doing something wrong, then you're blacklisted. You see what I'm saying? I'm not saying, oh, that's the, but when you start to combine those things start to build over and over again, those things subliminally start to work into your psyche. Prejudice and racist attitudes of individuals also infiltrate institutional structures and organizations, and that forms the foundation for systemic racism. So, for example, what I mean by systemic racism? The institution of slavery, apartheid in South Africa, the Dred Scott versus John F. Sanford decision of the Supreme Court that said that black people were property and not human beings, Jim Crow laws after slavery. Those are institutional racist kinds of ideologies. Now, even in the history of the Catholic Church, there have been leaders and organizations that chose to follow the civil law rather than the law of God by owning slaves. implementing segregation in churches, excluding minorities from participation in the life of the church. And these effects are still felt in the church today. Now, that said, we have to be careful with the term institutional racism. In order to claim factually that an institution is racist, you have to show that the institution actively promotes racism through official or unofficial policies, procedures, directives that enshrine the belief that one race is superior to another. Now, institutional racism has to be distinguished from individuals within institutions that continue to hold prejudice or racist attitudes. You see what I'm saying? You have to distinguish institutional racism, organization structures, from the people in the organization who are racist. Let me give you an example. The church herself, founded by Jesus Christ, is not racist because it's the bride of Christ. The church is perfect. But there are individuals in the church, both clergy and laity, who are racist. Likewise, law enforcement agencies. I was in law enforcement for 23 years, 11 years as a police chief. And so agencies in and of themselves are not racist. But unquestionably, there are individuals within the organization who are racist. We have to recognize the fact that we are all sinners in need of God's mercy, and that we are still dealing with the effects of original sin. Now, if we're honest, we have to acknowledge that the Church of the United States has often been slow to respond to issues of race. In 1979, he put out a document called Brothers and Sisters to Us, where they talked in depth about the issues of race. That was followed in 1984 by a wonderful document put out by the black bishops of that time, What We Have Seen and Heard. Beautiful document. Then 2015, Archbishop Kurtz of Louisville put out a wonderful statement on race, and Bishop Edward Braxton of Belleville, Illinois, he's been outspoken for years on issues of race. And here's something that he said I think is just powerful. We do not experience our faith in Jesus Christ and his command to love at the deepest level of our being. So he thinks one of the issues with regard to race is that we're not experiencing our faith in Jesus Christ and his command to love at the very deepest level of who we are. I thought that was powerful. And most recently, in 2018, the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops put out a document called Open Wide Your Hearts, The Enduring Call to Love. Wonderful document on racism. Now, like all of you, I am sickened by the events of the past weeks, months, and years. The solution to what we are seeing and experiencing in this country is not rioting or looting or vandalism. Racism is learned behavior, and Catholics can play a significant role in breaking down the walls of racism by taking a hands-on approach to creating pillars of mutual respect and understanding, built on the firm foundation of covenant relationship. So what specifically can we do? One, we need to see past stereotypes and see people. We need to see past stereotypes and see people. I was telling Ty and Malcolm, the guys at lunch today, about experience I had in Chicago. I was speaking at a huge conference, 5,000 people. I was dressed just like I am now, suit, shirt, tie, crucifix, deacon pin. I was walking into an elevator at a hotel in Chicago, and as I walked into the elevator, the only other person was a little white lady in there. So I walked in the elevator, I smiled and nodded my head at her, and her eyes got really big. She backed up to the back of the elevator and grabbed her purse, pulled it close to her. And I'm like, oh, she's scared. So I didn't say anything. I turned around, I pushed my floor, I stood right in front of the doors of the elevator, didn't say anything to her. The doors open up, I walk out to go to my room. Now, why was she afraid of me? Now, granted, She may have had something happen to her traumatic that was in the past. I get it. I didn't do it. Why is she afraid of me? You know, why is it I still walk down the street and sometimes people cross the street? They're afraid. I mean, they see me. You look intimidating. I'm a teddy bear, man. I'm a big old squeezable teddy bear. But when people see me, they say, oh, big black guy, and they get scared. You know, let me tell you something, my friends. That hurts. That happens to you enough, that hurts. So we need to start seeing, and here's how we do it. Very first page of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1 says, we're made in the image and likeness of God. Every single human being made in God's image and likeness. What does that mean? We hear that all the time. Let's stop and think about what that means for a second. The word image is selem in Hebrew, a masculine noun. It literally means a shadow that is the outline or representation of the original. A shadow that's the outline or representation of the original. So I'm standing under the lights and I'm casting a shadow. Is the shadow me? No. It's the image. It's the outline. It's the representation of me. But yet if I move my arm, the shadow moves the arm. If I move my leg, the shadow moves the leg. What does that mean spiritually? Are we God? Oh, come on. Even with the mask on, you should be saying, no, we're not God. But yet, 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 4 says we are partakers in the divine nature. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 9 says our bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit that we have within us from God. Genesis 2, verse 7 says that God breathed into the nostrils the breath of life. Nishmak ruach ka'im in Hebrew. Beautiful phrasing for God taking the breath of his life and pouring his divine life into us. We're not God, but we have God's image, God's outline, God's shadow imprinted onto our souls. That was the plan from the beginning. So what does that mean? Like when you move your arm, the shadow moves. The idea before the fall was we mirror God. When we speak, God speaks. When we think, God thinks. When we love, God loves. We're supposed to be mirroring and reflecting the image of God for others. That was the idea. What about the likeness of God? A feminine noun, demuth in Hebrew, which means similar. Well, what does that mean spiritually? I had a wonderful time here at Benedictine. My first time to this university, or to this college university. Beautiful place. Love the grotto. Everything. You guys are amazing. Had a meeting with President Minnis today, and it's wonderful. Now, what I hope you don't do is build a Deacon Harold statue. Don't do that, okay? But say you built the statue. Now, you put the statue on one side of me, and you put my son Benjamin, you put Ben on the other side of me. Now, you would say the statue and my son are both in my likeness because they both look like me. In fact, the statue looks more like me than my son. But, unlike the statue, what does my son possess? What do we have possessed in common? An ousia, right? In Greek, a spirit, a nature, a being, right? So even though the statue looks more like me, my son is much more in my likeness. That's the idea of being made in the image and likeness of God. And that's how we need to start seeing each other. You know who did this so beautifully? Mother Teresa, St. Teresa of Calcutta. You know, I was watching a special. I rarely watch television. But when she was about to be canonized, I wanted to see what the secular media says about her. So I was watching a BBC program, and it had this documentary from like the 90s. And this reporter was following Mother Teresa around for half a day. And I was watching her and her nuns literally in the sewers of Calcutta, picking up the lame, picking up those with leprosy, limbs falling off, people dying of AIDS and pleurisy and all these other nasty diseases. And they were bringing them back to the hospice, and they were taking care of them and praying with them, because these people are going to die. Mother Teresa and her nuns weren't nurses, but they were there to show the poorest of the poor the love of God. That's what I saw. The reporter You can see, as the time went on, you can see his face start to change. The smell, the stench, the way people looked. He finally got to the point where he said to Mother Teresa, how could you stand to be around people that look like this? And little Mother Teresa looked at him and said, is that what they look like? Because when she saw someone, she saw Jesus. And the first place we need to start is to see Jesus in the person standing in front of you. That's what I want someone to look at when they see me. I don't want them to be scared. I want them to see Jesus. And that has to start with each and every one of us making a commitment to do just that. That's where we have to start. We should stop supporting media outlets, individuals, and organizations that create and encourage and perpetuate racist stereotypes and propose violence and anarchy as solutions. Next, we have to appreciate the gift of cultural diversity. We have to host and attend cultural, like for example, in the parish. Some very simple things we can do at the parish level. The documents that I talked about before that the bishops had written over the years, what about taking those documents, especially the last one that just came out a couple years ago, and doing a study group in a parish? Taking a document. Well, we don't have any black people or Hispanic people or Native American people in our parish. How about the neighboring parish? Here's something you can do. Have a potluck. People love being around food. So have a potluck. People can bring. Let me tell you the story of my parish, Immaculate Heart of Mary. Small inner city parish in Portland. Okay, our parish is half African, like dozen countries in Africa African. The other half are Filipinos and a mix of other people. Very rich, culture diverse parish. But when I first got there, when we moved to Oregon, they were like separate in silos. The Vietnamese were separate from this group, the Africans were separate. I'm like, what's going on here? So Father Nicholas decided to make a change, to bring people together. So one of the things he did, we had a potluck. So the Vietnamese brought their food, the Africans brought their food, the Filipinos brought their food, and Europeans brought their food. This massive potluck, and people just started getting up and telling their stories. Let me tell you what it's like to be black and Catholic in Portland. Let me tell you what it's like when my parents came over from Vietnam and what it was like to struggle for acceptance. Let me tell you what it's like coming from Mexico. We just started listening to each other's stories. And people, what people found most amazing? How much we had in common. How much we had in common. And what did that start to do? We started having potluck after potluck. And then Father stopped organizing it because the people wanted to organize it themselves. Then we started having cross-culture in the Mass. For example, the Vietnamese choir would come and sing to the English Mass. Man, to this day, I don't understand a word they're saying. But man, the singing is powerful. I love the Vietnamese choir. Every time they're there, I'm like, yes! It's beautiful, meaningful, powerful singing. Beautiful. Don't understand a word. But they're speaking the beauty of their culture. We need to share experiences like that. Now here on campus, you got the black student. I'm not sure if you have other types of unions with students of different racial backgrounds. But don't just say that, well, those are just for the black kids, or those are just for the Hispanic kids, those are for the Native American kids. They're for everybody. Let me tell you, when I got, as a freshman at Notre Dame, my roommate, now I lived in a triple, and I had two roommates. Now back then, in the 80s, no internet, no cell phones. All right, so we got a list. These are your roommates. I've never seen them. You can't Google them. There's no Google. So I had to wait till I got there to see who these people were. So I got there first. I'm sitting on the bed. I didn't want to plant my stuff and make myself at home till all three of us got a chance to talk about how we're going to divide the room up. So I'm waiting. The next guy comes in. Which one are you? There was Brendan, me, and Ed. He goes, which one are you? I said, I'm Harold. He said, first words to me, you're black. Oh, Captain Obvious, this is going to be a long year. And I was like, oh, this gonna get worse. So then, because I was waiting, I had my guitar out. and I was playing Panama by Van Halen. So then he goes, after he says, you're black, he goes, you like Van Halen? Black people like Van Halen? I'm like, oh, Lord have mercy, it's going to get worse. Just, oh, Lord, no, please. But you know what? Ed had only known one black person his entire life. His entire life till that point. Now he has to live with me. And so I said, well, this either be the worst year I've ever had or the best year. I decided to be the best year. So you know what we did? And I'm going to stereotype here. Now, Ed was used to going to parties where they go off campus, or you go to a bar, you go to somebody, they drink, and they pass out and throw up. That's not my idea of a good time. Now, the Black Cultural Arts Center at Notre Dame, that's where I went to the party. Because when they went there, no drinking, no drugs, no that. You just go there, you put on the music, you just dance and have an amazing time. I invited Ed to come with me. He goes, I can't dance. I said, don't matter, bro, just come. So he came with me, only white dude there. Man, he started doing that. People were, bah, bah, bah. He was like, at first it was uncomfortable, but then the girls grabbed him, brought him out on the floor, and they're like, whoa, and it's like, whoa, what's going on? Oh my, it was hilarious. And I'm not kidding you. He talked about that experience for the next week. He loved it. And you know what? Ed and I we decided to room together the next year. And we were both in each other's weddings. And we're still close friends to this day. Because through dialogue, through understanding, we broke down those barriers. And Ed started to see not a black guy, but he started to see Harold. And we had an amazing experience and friendship built on that fact. So he appreciated the gift of culture. For example, if you go to a church, like if you go to a church that has, you have no people of color at all. How about putting some saints up? Like say, I go to Elizabeth Ann Seton. Okay, how about putting a statue of Martin de Porres up there? How about putting St. Teteric Titaquitha up there? How about putting some St. Peter Claver, some other, people don't know who's that? So you start to see that there are saints in the church that look like us. See, those little subtle things are start to tear down the walls and build bridges of understanding. This is what I love. Make a serious effort to promote conversation and dialogue, because that's not happening now. I said this already a couple times today. The reason why we're seeing the looting and the violence and the rioting, because there's no leadership. Back in the 60s, it was Martin Luther King. In South Africa, Nelson Mandela. Today, nobody. Because there's no one we can rally around and say, here's someone who cuts through all the rhetoric. Here's someone we can stand behind. Here's someone who's speaking truth. Here's someone we can support. Here's someone who's actually trying to bring people together. There's nobody. So in the midst of a leadership void, a leadership vacuum, we're seeing violence and looting and rioting. Back in 2016, after an incident of violence in Los Angeles, Snoop Dogg and a rapper called The Game decided to meet with the mayor and the police chief of Los Angeles. The purpose was to facilitate effective change through dialogue and understanding. And I thought, wow. Because remember, Snoop, one of them Crips, one of them was Blood. They said, let's put that aside. We have to sit down and let's work this thing out. They need to see us as human beings, not gang colors. They need to start saying, we need to start understanding and building. And so they did that. I think efforts like that need to be applauded and multiplied, where communication barriers are shattered and respectful dialogue is opened between those in power and those who are disenfranchised. Now, I tell you, when's the last time you heard of an incident in Los Angeles since 2016? See what I'm saying? What? And what happened? In Los Angeles? Okay, and obviously you're upset. We're all upset about that, right? Yeah. So between 2016 out, so we had another incident there. But that building the respectful dialogue, I think, is critically important. Deep-seated commitments to building integrity, sharing wisdom, imparting knowledge, can lead to a reciprocity of love and change. Reaching out with compassion to those of different races and hearing their stories, responding with empathy, working through differences with humble and contrite hearts can truly create a harmonic of love that will reverberate in the hearts and through our land. I honestly believe that law enforcement practices and use of force practice need to be reevaluated. Now, during my 23-year career in public safety, I served on various leadership positions in organizations like the Western Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, the Association of Threat Assessment Professionals, the Protection Specialist Association, and many, many others. And from 2002 to 2008, I had the honor and privilege of serving on the board of the Department of Public Safety Standards and Training for the state of Oregon. That is a governor-appointed position over the agency that oversees training and resources for public safety officers to maintain the highest level of skill and to facilitate excellent service for Oregon's community and citizens. So I am very intimately familiar with how law enforcement officers are trained, and I will be the first to admit that given the frequent incidents of police brutality over the last several years, it needs to be reformed. There's no doubt about that. This sentiment is shared by many other frontline officers, including members of the Minneapolis Police Department who condemn the actions of Officer Chauvin and the death of George Floyd, and they stand ready to listen and embrace the calls for change, reform, and rebuilding. That absolutely needs to happen. Reform and rebuilding, yes. Defunding, no. The idea of defunding police departments is a far-reaching overreaction, is short-sighted, and ultimately irresponsible. In this regard, I totally agree with Officer Brandon Tatum, who said that there are dangerous, evil people in the world. And when that person comes to your front door and endangers your family, who are you going to call? Politicians? Activists? No. You're going to call a man or a woman who took an oath to uphold the law and give their life, if necessary, to protect you and your family. The police officer is not going to turn away from you because of your race, your religion, or your past mistakes. So what exactly are you going to defund? Human trafficking? Homicide investigations? Identity theft? Elder abuse? Drug and gang intervention? Policing is a vocation and a calling from God. Jesus himself says, greater love than no man has to lay down his life for his friends. Most police are excellent and work hard every day to serve and protect and to give their lives if necessary for the people under their care. Now, if there were serial arsons going around and they found the arsonists and the arsonists were firemen, would people say, let's defund the fire department because of these arsonists are firemen? No one's calling for defunding of physicians who are supposed to care and save the lives of their patients because some doctors perform abortions or euthanize their patients. No one's calling for defunding of doctors. Police are not trained to kneel on people's necks or to shoot people in the back. We are not trained that way. No one is more angry about what's been going on than good cops. And just like good priests who are angry about those few priests who abuse children. So what can be done? I would say, first of all, go on a ride along. You know, these people who are calling for these changes have no idea what they're talking about, what the day-to-day officer goes through. Go on a ride along. You sign a waiver, you don't have to pay anything, and you sit in that patrol car and you go on actual calls that the police officer is going on. And you get to see what they do every single day. If you have a chance to go to a citizens academy, I would encourage you to do that. Where they put citizens, for example, traffic stops. You know, you walk up to the window, so you go, the police officer tells you what to do, you walk up to the car, the guy gets out of his car and starts walking towards you. You're giving commands to stop. He's not listening. He reaches into his pocket. Take your hands out of your pocket. Stop. Stop. The guy's still walking toward you with his hand in his pocket. What do? When you put a citizen in that situation, They're praying for it. Do I taser? Do I my gun? What do I? See, now it's different. It's different. I think they need to implement better psychological testing and screening to identify bias and prejudice. We're not doing a good job of that right now. Screening for those kind of things. When you do a traffic stop, you shouldn't treat that traffic stop differently because a person is white than if they were black or Hispanic. All of them should be done exactly the same way. But that's not let's be real, that's not what's happening. I mean, I've been profiled. I was driving my wife one day. My wife is Irish and German. We were driving the car, get pulled over. It wasn't speeding, it was a driving while black thing. Now, I'm a chief now, right? So, get pulled over. My wife is pissed. She's like, when he comes, I said, honey, don't do anything. So I have my hands, on the wheel and roll down the wheel. Yes, officer. Driver's license registration. Absolutely, officer. Here you go. And my wife is just waiting to say something and get mad. I said, no, honey, let the officer do his job. He went back. He ran it through leads. And, of course, he came back and said, sorry, have a nice day. When he saw in the system who I was. Yeah, that was nice. But what about the kid from the neighborhood who that happens to almost every day for doing nothing except driving his car? And he gets pulled over because he is suspicious or he's in the wrong neighborhood at the wrong time. That's garbage. Again, we are not trained that way, but because we're not doing enough to train or to identify biases and prejudices within officers, they're bringing that with them into the job, but we're not trained that way, guarantee you that. I think we need to implement more effective scenario-based training. Right? So one of the things they do is they train officers, they put them in difficult scenarios and figure out how they're going to handle this. Again, every officer goes through the same thing, but what happens is your biases start to play into how you handle this particular situation based on a person's race, and that should not be happening at all. Have police departments follow the recommendations of the Police Executive Research Forum to assist officers in recognizing the inherent, this is their words, the inherent dignity of every human person. Bam. You see past stereotypes and you see people. This is why I think community policing would be an important addition to this thing. Have officers in neighborhoods get to know the people that live there. Visit with them, check in on them. Hey, how's your son doing today? Check in with the store owner. How's everything going today? You all right? Everything going good? Is there anything I can help you with? Anything you're seeing? Anything we need to be aware of? And we've gotten away from that model. We need to get back where officers are actually caring about the people that live, that's invested in those communities that they're helping to keep safe. So they can, again, start to see people and not just objects. Ongoing mandatory cultural diversity training for all officers. We're not doing that right now. Well, some agencies are, but not across the board. I think that's extremely important. Working with police unions to toughen accountability regarding moral turpitude and officer discipline investigations. Let me just explain what that's about. When I was on the Department of Public Safety and Standards training, one of the things that we do, when the officer takes an action, the board will look at that action, evaluate it to see if we need to pull the officer's license, all right, from operating as a police officer for the state of Oregon. And so we got this case once where an officer pulled over a woman for speeding, and when he went to the window, he saw that she was attractive, and so he made a very inappropriate remark to her. She got mad. She filed a complaint. The officer got suspended, and the issue came to us to investigate for a moral turpitude violation. Now, when his agency suspended him, they didn't follow the union regulations exactly for how that suspension was supposed to happen. So the union wanted to put the guy back on the street. And we're like, oh, wait a minute. We never investigated this woman's allegation. We didn't look. So you can't put that guy back on. He might do it to somebody else. Well, no, because the law, the specific regulation, union document wasn't followed. Whoa. And I said, this ain't happening. So I called an emergency session of the board, and I brought the union people and said, we ain't leaving this room till we get this fixed. And we eventually got a solution to that. But you can't have unions defending cops that are doing bad things. So we have to put different systems in place for that. The next thing, put God back in society. We have taken God completely out of the public discourse. We've stopped seeing each other made in the image and likeness of God as a culture, and instead we're trying to make God in our image and likeness, which is fulfilling one of Satan's lies. You will be like God. As faithful Catholics, we can no longer allow secular culture and ideology, with its promulgation of subjective relativistic truth, to displace the objective truth of the Catholic faith in doctrine and principles. In order to defeat racism, there must be further introspection and a deeper examination of conscience in order to arrive at the root cause of disunity and divisiveness within humanity that leads to sinful actions. We need to see ourselves and worldly principles as the autonomous center of truth. That's what's happening now. When we worship the Trinity of me, myself, and I, we lose the perspective of covenant relationship. Covenant relationship is about making a gift of myself to someone else. So it's not worshiping me, myself, and I. It's when you break yourself open to pour yourself out in love. It's when you give yourself away in love is when you truly find yourself in God. So we need to get back to those principles. We have to recognize and acknowledge the reality of sin, that it affects us and speaks to us within the depths of our being. We cannot allow the pain of sin and the suffering that it causes to take root in our hearts. We cannot allow sin to control us or its anguish to overwhelm us. Conquering sin in our lives begins with personal transformation, with an interior conversion that reveals the fundamental truth of being in existence, that God is love, and in himself, he lives a mystery of personal loving communion. Creating the human race in his own image and keeping it in being, God described in the humanity of man and woman the vocation and thus the capacity and responsibility for love and communion. We have to get back to an understanding of us and we, not I and me. We have to walk by faith, not by sight. You know, the cause for a wonderful priest, Venerable Father Augustus Tolton, is moving quite well through the Vatican right now. Father Tolton is the first black priest in the United States, born a slave in 1854 and died in 1897 in Chicago. He was only 43 years old when he died. Put up with tremendous racism. Despite the fact that from the time he was a small boy, he learned from his association with the right race to accept the fact that degradation and contempt were a common lot for God's black children. But Tolton never retaliated or sought revenge. Though he was upset, clearly, by the circumstances of his time, his heart was never filled with animosity or vitriol. Instead, Augustus Tolton responded with love and patience and understanding. Now, what's striking to me when I first learned about Father Tolton was why he remained in the Catholic Church despite a lifetime of racial animosity and prejudice. In the face of such bigotry and hatred, when he was even called nigger priest by the other priests who told the white parishioners that went to his parish, it doesn't count for your Sunday obligation if you go to the black church. Why did he leave? If anybody had a reason to leave the church, it was him. Nobody would have blamed him. But Father Tolton was able to discern what many fail to perceive and do not fully appreciate. That what the Catholic Church actually teaches is true and good and beautiful, despite the hypocrisy and contradiction of church members who do not actually live the faith that they profess. Father Tolton's always acknowledged the great gift of his Catholic faith and recognized that personal sin and human weakness are not greater or more powerful than the strength of objective truth found in Catholicism. He said the Catholic Church deplores a double slavery, that of the mind and that of the body. She endeavors to free us both. In this church, we don't have to fight for our rights because we are black. The church is broad and generous. She is the church for our people. Obviously, one of the things we also must do is pray. Obviously, we're all praying to the end of racism. We're all praying for that. But one of the things I think that we can do to really improve our prayer, to increase the power of prayer, is a couple things. First of all, praying in adoration. Praying in silence. Why is that important? We live in a culture that's filled with noise. And when God wants to speak to you, God doesn't speak to you here. God speaks to you where? Here. What St. Benedict called the aurum cordis, the ear of the heart. That's where God can touch you. That's where God can change your life, is in your heart. But in order to hear that voice, you have to be quiet. But we are very uncomfortable in our culture with silence. Very uncomfortable. You have to have your iPod, your iPad, Twitter, this, that, the other. Some people can't even fall asleep without a radio on or some kind of distraction. I'm not saying those things are bad, but they're tools. They're not your life. They're tools. So put the tool down and find some time for quiet. Because in that quiet, you will listen to the voice of God and allow that voice to change your life. The other thing to enhance our prayer is fasting. Remember that Jesus sent the 72 out. They came back and said, Jesus, we get all kinds of cool stuff. But there were some demons we couldn't cast out. What happened? Jesus said, yes, there are only some demons that can be cast out by prayer and fasting. So we have to unite fasting with our prayer. Now, I'm not just fasting from food, which you could do, obviously, but maybe fasting from something that you enjoy. So if you have a favorite television show or something like that, you may want to stop watching that show for an entire season as your fast to unite with your prayer for a particular intention. Because fasting united with prayer is a powerful combination. I think, of course, asking the intercession of the Blessed Virgin Mary. You know, John Paul II says in Mulieris Dignitatem, in God's eternal plan, it is woman in whom the order of love in the created world of persons first takes root. Through the Spirit, love becomes a gift for created persons. And the dignity of woman is measured in the order of love, which is essentially the order of justice and charity. I love that. Love that. Now think about this. Everybody says, oh, Catholic Church is not fair. No, they won't ordain women priests, blah, 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 blah. You know why? Because priests are fathers. Priests are, but look at the women. So, well, look, even in the Bible, God creates the woman second after the man. She's not created second. She's created last. Look at Genesis 1. All the animals, and in Genesis 1:27, male and female, he created them. She's not second, she's last. What about Genesis 2? The man, Adam, in the garden, which, by the way, Adam means in Hebrew means the fullness of humanity. Isha and Isha are man and woman differentiated. Then all the animals, and then her from the rib from the side, the Selah from the side, last. Why? She's the pinnacle, the high point, the exclamation point, the whipped cream and the cherry on top of God's creative activity. After he creates her, done. Why? She's the life giver and the life bearer. Even if a woman never has a child, by the very nature of how God created her, she has the power to participate in the life-giving power of the Holy Spirit. We pray every Sunday, Credo et Spiritus Sanctus Dominum et Vivificantem. I believe in the Holy Spirit, the Lord and giver of life. Think about the greatest saint in the history of the church. The great example of what it means to be human is a wife and a mother. A teenage girl. The best example of what it means to be human, who cooperated with God's will perfectly. And I'll end with this. I think a good parable to kind of sum this whole issue up is the Good Samaritan. The Samaritans in the eyes of the Jews were aliens, they were unwanted foreigners, and there was strong hostility between the Samaritans and the Jews, even though they were like cousins, racially or culturally, but they had different beliefs, and the Samaritans were considered heretics. So this despised outsider, presumed to have nothing of the Spirit of God's mercy and compassion, gives the Jewish man lying on the ground the attention that the clergy refused to give. Remember, the priest walks by, sees him on the side of the road. Well, I'm not going to ritually defile myself, keeps walking. The Levite sees him, oh, nope, can't do nothing for you, bro. Keeps walking. And there's just a Jewish guy on the ground now. But the Samaritan, the enemy, comes by, and he's the only one that has compassion and mercy. In fact, the Samaritan went to extraordinary lengths to take care of the injured man, sparing no expense. What more, the priest and the Levite didn't even make the effort to call the police. Hey, let me get somebody to leave. If I'm not going to help, let me get somebody who can help. Didn't even do that. What would you have done in that situation? Now, of course, everybody's going to say, I would have helped the guy. That's easy to say in retrospect. But what if the almost dead man was one of the police officers involved in George Floyd killing? As we walk by the officer on the side of the road, the anger and the hatred that we feel would burn like a fire in our hearts. And we want more than anything for that person to suffer greatly, even to the point of death. Would we want to just leave him there, lying there saying, you deserve it, and not give him a second thought? Is that what our faith tells us? Yet our Lord tells us that we must be good Samaritans. The Samaritan exemplified a new standard of holiness, where God no longer requires people to separate from others, but calls them to extend mercy to everyone in need, and not to exclude anyone on the grounds of prejudice or hatred. Our Lord gives us no other options and makes no exceptions. If we are to defeat the evil of racial injustice, we must always lead with love. We must be the Samaritan. Now, despite the efforts of Dr. King and countless others who gave their hearts, their souls, and their lives to the cause of justice, peace, and equality, racism still remains a problem to this day. Is that because they failed? Not by a long shot. Racism persists because of the existence of evil and sin. Ultimately, the remedy will not solely come from a human effort. What is needed is the recreation of the human being according to the image revealed in Jesus Christ. For he revealed himself what each human being can and must become. We must not be afraid to live out our baptismal call to holiness with fervor and enthusiasm. We must not be afraid to stand up for truth, justice, and peace. Let us lovingly accept our Lord's invitation to go and do likewise, as living signs and witnesses of God's tender love and mercy, so that the world may see the good that we do and give honor and glory to God. Amen. Thank you all very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have. There's a microphone there.
Deacon Howard, thank you for coming to our campus. I hope you've enjoyed your visit here. You said a lot of interesting things in your talk. I have a lot of notes written down, so I'm not quite sure where to begin. You keep talking about rioting, looting, violence. I would encourage you to look at the report that came out on Friday that indicated 93% of all Black Lives Matter protests have been peaceful. And the majority of arrests that have resulted from the unrest has been the accelerationist cells led by the Boogaloo Boys and the Alphabet Boys. But in addition to this, you keep saying rioting, looting, they're not the answer. But America was born in rioting. We destroyed millions of pounds worth of tea. We burned the king's ships. We burned the governor's mansions over taxation largely. So rioting to enact change is an American ideal. It is fundamental to who we are, to the point that Thomas Jefferson argued a republic can only survive if the tree of liberty is occasionally watered with the blood of true patriots. And Frederick Douglass understood this as well when he proclaimed that power never willingly sacrifices any of its position to those that it's oppressing. And so you've talked a lot about what we can do to make ourselves feel better through prayer and through understanding individually.
Let's not make ourselves feel better. It's for effective change.
Yeah, but you haven't explained how any of this change is going to be affected at all. None of this addresses the system of systemic racism in America. None of this tackles the problem.
Systemic racism
None of this tackles
and people
the
in the
problem.
systems that are racist.
None of this tackles the problem of the inherent injustice and inequity in our justice system. None of this solves the problem of switching from Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign to Ronald Reagan's war on drugs and the mass incarceration of African American males that followed. You talk about the power of the nuclear family in your YouTube videos and how Black Lives Matter is a threat to that. But you don't talk about how white people have been destroying African American nuclear families since 1619. So what I hear is a lot of posturing and a lot of straw man arguments that are easily blown down. But what I'm not hearing is what our obligations are as Catholics to address this in a collective manner and still adhere to the American ideals of equality, liberty, and the separation of church and state.
Well, maybe you didn't hear my talk. I don't
listened
know what
to
you
the
were
whole
listening
thing,
to.
sir.
My whole talk addressed exactly that. It's a Catholic response to racism.
No, what you
Yes.
said is, no, sir, what you said is we should pray and we should talk
At the
to
end
each
of the
other.
talk, I talked about praying. I
We
listed
should
about a
pray
dozen things
and
that we
should-
need to do.
You also said there's no African American leadership. Why is there no
I said there's
African
no
American
leadership.
Why is there no
I
leadership?
didn't say there was. I said there's no
Why
leadership.
is there no leadership?
Period.
And who
Because
says there's
people
no
are afraid
leadership?
to lead.
Is Ta-Nehisi Coates not a leader?
Who is that?
Is Ibram? Wow. Okay,
See
thank
what
you.
I'm saying?
Thank you. You have
At the
made my
at the
point.
national level,
you have
who
made
is the
my
leader?
point. You are completely unwilling to engage in the dialogue that's going on here.
I'm engaged with dialogue every single day.
You just said, who is Ta-Nehisi Coates? Who is Ibram Kendi? And you're going to sit here and say you're engaged in the Black Lives Matter
No,
and
I'm not.
anti-racist
I'm
dialogue
Catholic.
of America.
I'm engaging in a Catholic response to racism in this country. That's what I'm interested in.
So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My Monsignor was Charles O. Rice. Do you know who Charles O. Rice is?
No, I do not.
The labor priest of Pittsburgh walked hand in hand with Dr. King.
Mm-hmm.
He never would have condemned Dr. King. You apparently would have been fine condemning Dr. King because Dr. King.
I quoted from Dr. King.
You
extensively in my
also
talk.
completely miscategorized Dr. King by saying he was a champion of peace. He was not a champion of peace. He was a champion of nonviolent civil resistance. That is inherently unpeaceful, and that is exactly what the Black Lives Matter movement is as well.
I don't think so. I think if you look at their organization, see what they're about, Black Lives Matter, nothing to do with Black Lives actually mattering. Look at their own website. Look, I got quotes. You want to hear what they say? We build a space that affirms black women and the free of sexism, misogyny, and environments where men are centered. So take the men out of the family. We disrupt the Western prescribed nuclear family structure requirement by supporting each extended family as villages collectively to care for one another, especially our children, to the degree that mothers, parents, and children are comfortable. Where's the fathers? We're a queer affirming network, all the kind of stuff. Where's that? So my question is, why aren't the Black Lives Matter protesting Planned Parenthood, an organization that takes the lives of hundreds of thousands of black lives every year? What's their plan for economic growth, stability, and development within black neighborhoods? What's their plan to end drug and gang violence? What's their plan to actually strengthen nuclear families? What's their plan to create educational opportunities through, for example, voucher systems, so that black children can leave their failing schools and go to schools where they can excel academically? What's their plan to promote black entrepreneurship? What's their plan to actually end racism? That's the questions I would have for the Black Lives Matter organization, because I've heard none of that addressed by the organization itself. Oh, I'm listening. I listen. Yes, I do, sir. Anyway, next question. Anybody else, please?
Can I just ask why you didn't bring up Breonna Taylor and the fact that she was murdered in her sleep in her home by police?
So I talked about the fact that there needs to be reform. I'm not talking about specific cases here. We all know the case. We all know what's been going on. And that, for a case, for example, is no-knock warrants. That should not be happening anymore. No-knock warrants should not be happening anymore. That's something, again, that's part of the reform that I was talking about.
Which
Those
Black
kinds of
Lives
things need to
Matter,
stop.
the organization, and the movement both stand for. I think that what we don't see is a separation between an organization and a movement.
Yes, I totally agree. I get a great example of what you talked about. I was doing a radio interview for the Archdiocese of Melbourne in Australia. All right? Now, the meme that they put up was Deacon Harold, it says Black Lives Matter. Okay? Now, I got Facebook deletes, I got lost Twitter followers, lost Instagram followers, because the emails like, what are you doing? I thought you were Catholic. Yes, I said, well, wait, what? Because you're right. There's nothing wrong with the statement Black Lives Matter as a social movement. There's nothing wrong, not at all. The problem is separating the social movement from the organization. The problem is they become conflated. To the point right now, wherever you say Black Lives Matter, people automatically go that you are supporting the organization, which is what happened to me. So the Archdiocese called and said, man, we're getting a lot of pushback. Do you want me to change the meme? I said, nope, don't change it, because now people are going to listen.
And I think that you responded very angrily to his question, and you pointed his question.
No, I'm a
Yeah.
boisterous, yeah, so. And I'm from Jersey, right? So sometimes
just
Jersey,
sensitive.
it sounds like
But-
shouting, but it's actually passion. You got to differentiate. I've rarely ever been angry in my life.
No, you're good.
Since
but
I got
was
married.
just saying you put
Passion.
what he said about Black Lives Matter onto the organization, but then you also just said that there's a separation. So I
Yeah.
think that we all need to remember that there's a
Yes.
difference between an organization
Yes.
and a movement.
100%
Just like there's
agree.
a difference between priests who molest children and the Catholic Church. We
Yes.
can put the same difference in Black Lives Matter.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. We have to separate the social movement, which is fine, from the organization. Totally agree with you 100% on that. But the problem is, I don't know, I think it might be too late to do that, because every time someone mentions, they automatically go to the organization. But you're right. I mean, there needs to be the separation. I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, exactly. Well, that's the point I made on the radio thing. I was trying. I didn't want them to change it because I want the people to listen to the distinction between the social movement and the organization. Thank you.
Hi, Deacon Harold. Thank you for coming and talking to us. I had a question. You touched a little bit about police reform, and I'm a strong advocate for not making this a political thing, because in reality, people living and dying should not be politics in the end of the day. It should be, like you said, normal human dignity. When it comes to diversity training and a lot of like the incorporation of that you talked about, I believe President Trump said something, I think it was at the end of last week, about calling diversity training and cultural like things that they're implementing anti-American propaganda. Would you mind kind of saying how we go about that? Kind of like, I guess, separating the two, how it really shouldn't be seen as that, because as I could tell from what you were saying, you believed that was an integral part to changing the police system.
Yeah, so what I meant by that is, like I said, we all have biases and prejudices. What's not being done in the training of police officers is to identify those biases and prejudices within the police officer himself. So when they teach you policing, they don't say, well, here's how you treat a black person, here's how you treat, you know what I'm saying? But what the officer does, without sometimes even recognize he has these biases and prejudices, will take the training that he's received, and then the training is filtered through those biases. Now he's treating someone of color differently because he's using the training and filtering it through his biases. What we need to do is to identify in the academy, before they go out onto the street, that they have these biases and prejudices. Recognize it, acknowledge it, and then train them so that, you know what, you treat every single person the same. But I think you can say that without the bias of prejudice, but then what's going to happen? Their natural instinct is going to take over to input. So once they actually identify it and call it by name and say, yeah, okay, I recognize that I have this going on in my life. Now that you've recognized it, now you can do some training and the ongoing cultural diversity to recognize and to work on that, because now when you're dealing with person, now you say, oh, wait a minute, my bias is kicking. Now my training needs to kick in, not my biases. See, that's what I'm talking about. I'm not into politics and like that. I want to make sure that the police officers are actually doing what they're sworn to do, which is to protect and to serve. And I think you have to identify those prejudices within yourself. That answer your question? Yeah. There's a couple. Oh.
So I'm going to go back to the beginning of the talk when you were talking about the difference between prejudice and racism. So you define prejudice as having no facts or objective experiences, and then racism as saying, hey, my race is better than yours, you're less than.
Yeah, so it's taking prejudices and biases, and then with the added dimension that I'm thinking and acting this way because my race is superior to your race.
Okay. And when referring to racism, you kind of mentioned just like the things like that, but
it's institutional. Institutional.
Okay.
Yes.
And I don't always think that it's that cut and dry, because if the white student crosses the street when they see me, but they do not do the same when the white student does that.
Sure.
Are they not racist?
They could be. They could be. But I'm talking, yeah, so what you have to do is it bias and prejudice, or are they crossing the street because they believe that my race is superior to your? See, that's the distinction you have to make. But you won't know that because the person's not engaging you. So there's no way to know for sure. Whether it's a bias or a prejudice, like, oh, I keep seeing things on TV about how black people hurt people on TV, news every single night, I'm seeing this. Maybe that's what's causing the fear, and not necessarily that they're racist. But it could be because my race is superior to your race. I don't have anything to do with this person, so I'm crossing the street. But we don't know. That's why you have to engage people. See, that's where it's hard to do that. But Jesus said, pick up your cross and follow me. That was hard for him to do too.
Whose job is that to engage those individuals?
I think the church.
Is it my job as the marginalized group to go out and overdo my part to mend that relationship?
And that's what I talked about, like at the parish level, or for example, having people that are white come into the black student thing and just learning it. I want to hear your experience. I want to know what it's like. I want to be the Samaritan. I just don't want to leave on the side of the road anymore. I want to understand your experience so I can actually be of help. I want to make change. That's what the Samaritan did. So I think that's the angle that I would take on that.
I understand, and I also think that we need to encourage white students to take that initiative, because
yes,
white ignorance is no longer an excuse when the internet and everything around us is so easily accessible.
Exactly. And what I do, like Ed, my roommate, I invited him to things. I said, Ed, let me open your eyes on this, bro. You know, and he, like I said, we became very close friends after that. You know, because we were able to break of that. But I'm the one who initiated the dialogue. You know, you got to start with someone. Maybe if they're too afraid, let's take the fear away. Let them see me as a person. You know, engage with me as a person and not a stereotype. So but I think we need to be the ones to help initiate that. And I'm hoping that some of the students here will come to the next meeting and engage more deeply because, okay, I really want to understand what it's like. I really want to understand this issue. I want to hear their stories. I want to, you know, I want to be that Samaritan. I think that's a starting place to deeper discussion and dialogue.
Hi. So in the talk, you talked about combating prejudice, and you also talked about leadership taking a role. You mentioned Snoop Dogg. I was wondering, what do you think at a national level are like the best ways to combat prejudice?
I think it can't be done at a national level. Okay. I think you have to start grassroots. So I think it needs to start within churches, with Catholic, Protestant. I think it needs to start with people of faith coming together. It's like the principle of subsidiarity, right? Take it out of the hands of the government, bring it down to the people who are at the lowest level, and be able to have those people who do what they do best work to affect change. So I think it's that same principle. So we need to start with the grassroots, let's say at the parish level, at the college university level, and start those. For example, there was a great story about a black reporter back in the 50s at the height of the Ku Klux Klan. And he arranged to have a meeting in a hotel room with the Klansmen. Now, the Klansman just heard the reporter wanted to talk to him. He didn't say he was. The reporter's there first. The Klansman enters his room with one of his boys, and he sees the black guy. The other guy, and the guy said, "No, hold on. The reporter. I'd like, you're black. I'm the head of the Klan. What are you talking about?" He said, "Oh, I know who you are. I just wanted to talk to you." And so the guy was like, he finally said, "Okay, I'm here. I got my boy here in case anything goes down. All right, let's talk." And so they started a discussion. That one evening started a series of discussions. So eventually, after years of respectful, engaging dialogue, not only did that white guy leave the Klan, the black guy ended up becoming the godfather for one of his children. So, and they became actually very close friends. So that's what I mean. You start at that level and you expand from there. I think at the national level, it's too politicized right now. It's Democrat versus Republican, liberal versus conservative. And at the national level, I think no one's really interested in doing anything seriously. That's why I think we just start at that grassroots level and let it spread organically from there. I think that's going to be the real. It's like a seed, right? You plant the seed and it has to water, sunlight, fertilizer. And I think that's the Holy Spirit working in the life of the church and the people in the church. And then that seed is going to grow and it's going to flower, But it has to start as a seed. I think that's where we need to start.
I have a question of myself.
Oh, yes.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but you're basically saying that as black people, we're supposed to go out of our way and engage with our white counterparts and tell them to come to our events, come to my home, or we go to them personally and have them share their stories and we share our stories with them. You mentioned that there are no black leaders today. Back then,
I said there's no leadership. I didn't say black leaders. I said no leadership.
There's no leadership. We had Nelson Mandela. We had Martin Luther King. As far as right now, me just being the president of the Black Student Union, I have my father scared back home in California that I'm going to get killed here and somebody's going to judge me because I'm making change on campus. From my understanding, he's not wrong for thinking that way, considering the past leaders that have been killed for trying to make change and being an activist. So how would you want me to go out and make change? It's good to make change in small groups, but at one point it's got to be public. So how would you want me to go out?
Well, 1 John 4:19 says that true love casts out all fear. So you have to desire for love to overshadow fear. I've been in Muslim countries like Malaysia and Indonesia. Malaysia, the entire country is under Sharia law. It was actually illegal for me to go there and speak about Jesus. Illegal. Now, when I went in, it was on a tourist visa. People begged me to come. And, some people say, well, no, that if you get caught, you could get arrested, I said, so what? I'm going to go because the people want me, I'm going to come. Now, of course, I had to take this off because I want to draw attention. They couldn't advertise the talks publicly. They had to do it through the intranet. And I went there, and in fact, I've been there twice now, and to Indonesia, to Jakarta, and some other places there. The most populous Muslim country in the world. I've been there talking about Jesus Christ. So true love casts out all fear. You have to learn how to love more than be afraid. Of course, you take all your normal precautions and stuff like that, right? You're not deliberately trying to get yourself killed. You're not deliberately. I think here on this campus, I think it's a safe place to begin that kind of dialogue. Nobody wants to kill you. But there are people who are ignorant, who are people who have biases, who have prejudices. You know, one of my best friends is Mary. Mary, her family, our families get together every summer, and we go down to their farm, and our kids like hang out and play. It's one of the joys that we couldn't do it this past summer because of friggin' COVID, but our families get together every year. We catch up, and it's a beautiful experience, you know. And those kinds of things happen when you're not afraid to love. All right. So I think think of the love aspect more than the fear aspect. That's what I would say. Don't be afraid. Jesus, be not afraid. And I took precautions going to the Muslim country. I ain't stupid. I did threat assessment for a living. But if I felt my life was like actively in danger, I wouldn't have gone. But I went anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to ask a quick question. One of the things that you said that really stood out to me is that racism is learned or enforced. And it starts at a young age because of the media that we consume that teaches us seeds of half-truths. And so I wanted to ask you, what media do you recommend to help combat racism and to enforce this?
Well, I think part of it was media. Other was parents, their examples, jokes, and things like that people hear. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why, but it's definitely learned. There's no question about that. Because again, little kids, they don't know what prejudice, racism is. It's just kids playing together, right? That other stuff is learned over time. You know what? You know the best way? Stop watching. I rarely, if ever, watch television. I don't watch it. You know what I find people that watch the news all the time? They're angry all the time. They're angry. Oh, this conspiracy theory, they're trying to this, Trump, this, da. I don't want to be around people like that. No, stop with the social media. Stop it. You know, what we need to do is become thinkers again, not feelers. We're living in a culture, I feel this, I feel that. You know how people get their information today? 30-second sound bites from media. Who's actually reading and studying and delving into this and understanding? You know, we just want quick, easy, convenient. You know, but we need to be, we're an incarnational church. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. We have to go deeper than just what's presented to us by the media. We have to learn how to think reasonably and critically, understand all sides of an argument. And because ultimately it's not about anger and vitriol. It's not about even who's right and who's wrong. Ultimately, it's about what's true and what's not true. And so effective dialogue is supposed to eventually lead to truth. And what is truth? Oh, no. Who is truth? I am the way, the truth, and the life. So that's eventually where the dialogue is leading. But you have to meet people where they are. So I would just say stop watching all that crap and start talking to actual people.
Thank you. And
if you're afraid of a black person, go to the meeting and say, I want to understand why I'm afraid of you. I have no idea who you are, but I want to understand why I'm afraid of you. I would I would have, oh, thank you. Wow. Thank you for being so honest. Now we can have a discussion. And it's through that kind of dialogue that we understand we have biases and prejudice and begin to break down the walls, like I did with Ed, my roommate, and so many other examples. You gave me an example today, very similar kind of example with someone in your life. You know, but that's where you need to start. So stay away from that. That stuff's poison.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks for coming. So you mentioned community policing. You were talking about like police that are within more community. What's your take on like police that are like they're not armed? They're like it's more of like a citizen type police. Like I've heard some stuff about that, and I'm kind of like trying to figure out if it would be a good idea for cities. Like, what is your opinion on that? I guess.
Well, here's the thing. When police officers are trained, there's something called the Force Continuum. So it starts at verbal de-escalation, and there's a continuum of interventions that leads to the pinnacle, which you never want to do, is the use of deadly force. okay? So when I was teaching, what I would emphasize the most along that continuum was verbal de-escalation, all right? Now, if you're responding to as a citizen to I'm going to be a citizen helper, you know, sometimes you walk in a situation where a husband is holding a knife against his wife, and you're there unarmed. What are you going to do to stop him from killing her? What are you going to use? I mean, you could try to talk to him, but maybe he's too drunk or too high to want to drop the knife. What are you going to do then? You see what I'm saying? So I think one of the things, because here's the thing, police aren't social workers. I mean, they're not trained to do that. So I would like to see a thing maybe where the police respond to a situation, and once everybody is safe, the social worker comes in and deals with the situation in the home. That'd be cool. Because police officers, there's not a job to try and be social workers. I mean, they're there to keep people safe, to see if there was a crime committed. Right? That's what they're there for. Or if there's a mental thing, to take someone for the 72-hour hold or something like that. They're not there to try to mediate and figure out what the situation is between. They're not trained for that. So maybe there could be a joint thing. I mean, there's all kinds of possibilities that could come out of this. Or maybe even have social workers come in and do some training with police officers. Here's what you say, and here's some things, you know, or have the social workers go on the ride-alongs, you know. There's a lot of different things that could happen there. But I think it's dangerous to have citizens without training, without the proper tools that they need in case something goes south, you know, and put themselves and other people in danger. See, here's the thing I don't understand. Police are not trained to shoot people to kill them. When you're learning those techniques for shooting, you're learning to stop what's happening. So, for example, if I walked into my house and someone's holding a knife to my wife's throat, I pull out my Glock and I point it at him and say, "Drop the knife." If he starts to cut my wife, I will shoot him. What is my purpose there? Not to kill him, to stop him from doing what he's doing. That's the objective. But the problem is that we see somebody does like kneeling on the guy's neck. That is not a training technique that any police officer is taught how to do. Or the other one, shooting people in the back that you mentioned. That's not a technique that police officers are trained how to do. Or just a recent one where the guy was walking away from the police. The police he went to his car, and as it turns out, he was reaching for a knife. The police shot him 7 times. Now, 7 times? Yikes, man. There's something else. You see what I'm saying? There's something else going on here that needs to be dealt with. You see? So, and in fact, that's what we need to get to. I think this whole vitriolic reaction, defund police, I mean, I can understand the anger, absolutely. But we have to look at what we can do to affect change so we're not seeing the things that we've been seeing. Jacob Blake, yes.
We have time for one more question because I'm over here already.
I think the person there in the wheelchair had yeah.
Can you hold it for me? Yes, I can. Okay. Have you yourself ever felt racially discriminated against in the Catholic Church? And what do we do as Catholics if we see that happening in our own parishes?
Thank you for that. I don't think I've been racist. I mean, there's been a couple, for example, I was in Florida. I was driving to a parish. Usually they pick me up at the airport, but in this case, because the parish was an hour away, they wanted me to rent a car. So they gave me directions to the parish, but not to the rectory, which wasn't on the parish grounds. So I said, I don't know where Father lives. So I said, let me go to the parish and ask someone. So I drove to the parish. I saw someone coming out of the church, got out of the car, and I went to ask them, excuse me, can you tell me where Father lives, the pastor? And I said, excuse me, and they said, the St. Vincent de Paul's not open today. That's where they give out the food and the clothes. And I said, okay, that's really good to know. But I actually want to know where Father lives because I'm giving the mission. Oh, you're the deacon. Oh, deacon, sorry. Oh, Father. You see what I'm saying? So those kinds of things. As far as, no, I've been not allowed in parishes because they don't like what I have to say. That's happened. Where people are organizing for me to come, and then the pastor finds out, it's the deacon. No, I don't want him here. He's too conservative. He's too blah, blah, blah. They throw all these labels on me. They don't know me. They throw the labels on me. So that kind of stuff, yes, but like racial, like we don't want him because he's black, no. I mean, I travel 250,000 miles a year all over the world, 19 countries. You know, I get invited to speak in many, many countries, many different races, many different types of people. So until COVID hit, I was not lacking for work. Let me tell you right now. All right, thank you all very much.
Once again, I just want to thank everybody for coming out tonight.